Hi everyone, I'm Laura Flanders. Welcome to this special program, What's at Stake? Net Neutrality, a joint production of Free Speech TV and Manhattan Neighborhood Network. We are coming to you from MNN's fabulous facility at El Barrio Firehouse in East Harlem, New York. In the coming hour, we'll break down the issue of net neutrality, crucial to keeping the internet an open and free platform, and discuss what net neutrality means for you and what you can do to preserve it. We'll be talking with special guests, including Tim Wu, who first articulated the concept of net neutrality 15 years ago, Gigi Sohn, a former advisor to the Federal Communications Commission, Brandy Collins of Color of Change, the nation's largest online racial justice organization, and Craig Aaron, the head of Free Press, a media advocacy group that supports net neutrality. I'll be back in a moment to tell you more about what you're about to see and hear, so please stay with us. Before hearing from our guests, we would like to take a few minutes to bring you up to speed on what is now at stake with the issue of net neutrality. What exactly does the term mean? What are the current threats to a free and open internet? And what might happen if, as promised, Donald Trump's FCC overturns the rules that Barack Obama's FCC put in place just 2 short years ago? 2 years ago, the Federal Communications Commission changed its rules to prevent powerful companies from setting up a fast lane on the internet at the expense of citizens and consumers. Then Chairman Tom Wheeler.
The action that we take today is an irrefutable reflection of the principle that no one, whether government or corporate, should control free and open access to the internet.
But now, net neutrality, the idea that the internet should be an open platform where all content is treated equally, is under attack.
Now, 2 years ago, I warned that we were making a serious mistake.
New FCC Chairman Ajit Pai, an advocate of limited regulation appointed by President Trump, wants to change the rules again.
We need rules that focus on growth and infrastructure investment. Rules that expand high-speed internet access everywhere. Rules that give Americans more online choice, faster speeds, and more innovation. And we are going to deliver.
If Pai succeeds, large telecom companies will be able to slow down or even block content coming from their competitors or anyone else. The Internet Service Providers, ISPs, will also be able to demand fees from companies like Netflix to stream their content to consumers on a fast lane.
With the FCC of the Trump administration, which is chaired by a former Verizon employee named Ajit Pai, has decided that they might as well take a weed whacker, as the phrase is, to net neutrality.
Tim Wu first proposed the concept of net neutrality in 2002.
It's a simple rule that just says that internet providers have to provide the whole internet. They can't block parts of it, and they can't speed up some parts and slow down others, or charge people gatekeeper fees. Just provide the internet. It's a simple rule.
If Donald Trump's FCC changes its stance again, however, expect the industry to squelch competition, limit choice, and raise prices.
They have every reason to want to block or disadvantage services that compete with them. They have every reason to try and monkey with cable service to try to make the bills higher. And so, I'd say the problem is too much cable and phone company power, and one of the solutions is net neutrality.
But Chairman Pai maintains that such regulation is too onerous, stifles innovation and growth, and reduces investment.
Reduced investment means that fewer Americans will have high-speed internet access. It means fewer Americans will have jobs. And it means less competition for American consumers.
The idea that that has prevented them from investing in what is an incredibly profitable product is frankly ridiculous and is just one of the largest red herrings out there.
Rashad Robinson is the executive director of Color of Change, the nation's largest online racial justice organization.
Well, Chairman Pai has been going on and on about how investment is going to go down as a result of Title II net neutrality rules. But in fact, we've actually seen the opposite.
Look, we fully support the net neutrality rules.
Industry representatives such as Craig Silliman in this Verizon video say they simply favor a different approach.
The FCC is not talking about killing the net neutrality rules, and in fact, not we nor any other ISP are asking them to kill the open internet rules. All they're doing is looking to put the open internet rules in an enforceable way on a different legal footing.
Timothy Carr is Senior Director of Strategy at Free Press, a public interest group that supports net neutrality.
To say that you're in favor of net neutrality but not in favor of the rules that make it a reality is sort of akin to saying you're in favor of free speech but you don't support the First Amendment.
When they say they favor net neutrality but they don't like the rules, it's like saying I like the beach without water and sand.
No industry representative would speak to us on camera, but Amy Schatz, a spokeswoman from the trade group U.S. Telecom, sent a statement.
ISPs support net neutrality rules that are both pro-consumer and pro-innovation. They support rules that will encourage investment, not discourage it. ISPs are ready to work with all sides on bipartisan legislation that will erase any uncertainty about the FCC's ability to enforce pro-consumer net neutrality rules and bring this long-running debate to a close.
Well, it is like deja vu. And before 2015, we fought this battle in 2010. Before 2010, we fought this battle in 2006. So here we are again in 2017 fighting the same battle.
Without net neutrality rules and regulations, there'll be nothing to stop ISPs from doing whatever they want, including stifling speech and opinions they oppose.
Net neutrality is also a free speech policy, is also a policy that forces the network to be more open to different viewpoints. And so politically, if the carriers can block certain sites or viewpoints, they have a lot more power over controlling discourse in this country.
When you had people that have been traditionally shut out from opportunity, and as they get onto the platforms that have provided so many others opportunities, if those platforms are no longer as open, if those platforms are no longer as powerful, what you are doing is taking away their ability to be able to be equal, have equal footing.
Net neutrality is meant to benefit the internet and the economy broadly, not just the broadband industry. The FCC needs to consider its impact on consumers and citizens, particularly since most of us have access to just one or two companies for residential service and only 4 big operators for wireless.
There's one problem for these large companies, and I'm talking about Comcast, AT&T, and Verizon, is that there's this rule called net neutrality which says that they cannot mess with the content that flows over that pipe. They hate that.
Who controls what information we get not only controls the future of media, but at the heart of it really controls the future of our democracy.
So the battle is joined again. If the FCC overturns net neutrality, the real losers will be all Americans because there will be fewer choices, fewer voices, less innovation, and higher prices in our internet future.
The future of whether or not citizens are informed and educated about the world around them and can make the type of clear-minded and informed decisions that make a society stronger.
I'd encourage people to do as much as they can, and I have been impressed. Like, people have camped outside the FCC and beaten drums. So there are a lot of people, particularly geeks, who just get into this issue. But collectivism doesn't hurt. That's what I think.
We really do encourage people to go beyond the so-called collectivism of simply doing things online and talk to members of their community, see whether there are any organizing opportunities nearby. Go and support the organizations like Free Press, like Fight for the Future, like EFF, like ACLU, that are doing a lot of organizing on this issue.
We need to be thinking about this as an issue of values, about who we are as a people, how we think about our democracy, and how we think about all of our voices being heard.
Welcome back. Tim Wu is a professor at Columbia Law School, contributor to the New York Times, and author of several books, including most recently, The Attention Merchants, the epic scramble to get inside our heads. He is also, as you just saw in our taped segment there, the man who actually coined the phrase net neutrality. Welcome, Tim. Glad to have you.
Sure.
Before we get to all of that coining, you're a super serious contributor to the New York Times and law guy, but what's your favorite show that streams online?
Oh, my favorite show that streams online.
So what I do. Favorite thing on the internet? What do you love best about the internet as it is now?
I will concede that I have the following thing. Actually, it relates to shows.
Okay.
If I watch any TV show, and I just watch them for any time, like I could watch The Wire now. I don't care if they're new or not. I will spend forever reading the reviews, the recaps, everything anyone has written about the show. I spend more time reading about shows than the shows themselves.
So the net has really liberated the world of reviewing as far as you're concerned.
For some reason, I just want to know what people had to say and whether they noticed the same thing I did. And you know, like professional reviewers, they just write, oh, it was good or bad.
Yeah.
But you know, internet people will be like, did you notice that she was wearing a red shoe in the first sequence and then wasn't over there? And I'll go back and watch it. So I'm like completely obsessed.
All right, so you are a net
stuff.
nerd, obviously.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Let's talk about what it was that spurred you to write your landmark paper about what you were calling then broadband discrimination.
That's true.
Back in the early 2000s.
Two titles, net neutrality, broadband discrimination. Didn't know it would turn on. I wrote that paper when I was fresh out of Silicon Valley. I'd been in the industry for a couple of years, and I kind of could see what was coming because I had sold the stuff that was designed to filter, to set up the fast lanes, set up the slow lanes. I was trying to sell that stuff on the corporate side, and I was trying to say to everybody, you know, this is going to be bad. Because I'd kind of seen, I was a programmer, I liked the internet, and I was like, the cable companies, the phone companies are going to sell this, and they're going to try and filter and block the internet. So my idea was like, we need something like net neutrality or a ban on broadband discrimination. And you know, it was pretty obscure. I mean, it was just a paper, and it anyway somehow caught traction.
Do we have net neutrality now? Is it a neutral playing field?
You know, I've always said there's rough neutrality is what we have. No one can guarantee that as many people will go to your blog as go to Google or Wikipedia. Like, it's not like that. But the question is, can you right now, you know, take a shot at it? Can you start a new site, start a blog, get out there, and maybe find your audience? I think we still have that, particularly because we have the federal net neutrality rules, which still haven't been struck down or still haven't been repealed by the Trump administration. So I think we have a rough thing. And you know, there's always new stuff on the internet. There's always places like Wikipedia can actually operate without paying off people, even though they're a nonprofit. So, you know, I think we have a rough neutrality.
Ajit Pai, the FCC chair under Trump, his legislation is called the Restoring Internet Freedom Act. Is that kind of like No Child Left Behind or the Patriot Act or something?
It's
like,
so
what are we restoring?
It's so unbearably Orwellian. I don't know quite how to deal with it. So we're restoring the freedom of not people, but of the companies to speed up some stuff and slow down others or block content they don't want to carry. Actually, some of the carriers, some of the phone companies have said, it is our First Amendment right as companies to block stuff. So that is the freedom they're talking about. It's not freedom for humans, it's freedom for corporations.
And we're going to talk more about this, obviously, with the panel, but this question of power in this whole discourse, this whole discussion. Yes, it's about what speed things run on in the internet, and we're all for neutrality here, at least. But it's also about power and tremendous amounts of power in a small number of hands. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you are at heart an antitrust lawyer, right?
That's true. Deep in my heart beating there is antitrust. I think it's very much about the individual facing companies in a situation where you have very little choice. I mean, are you really going to go without the internet entirely? It's a little bit, these days, it's a lot like electricity or water. You know, you could be completely off the internet, but then you're relegating yourself almost to like living in a cave. You're really putting yourself, and economically putting yourself in a tough position. So you have no bargaining power. So you have to rely on either the federal government or the states to enforce the bargain for you.
And is that what the discussion was in the Obama FCC and the Obama administration?
I think very much that they felt that there was a lot of concentrated power, that essentially the cable industry had won the battle, and that to maintain some balance, they need to have some rules. So yes, I think there was more sensitivity about containing the power of the biggest companies.
We'll hear more from Gigi Sono, I think was there at the time, in just a moment. But let's go back to this question of what the FCC under Ajit Pai actually says. I mean, you just heard it in the tape. He said it's all about innovation, infrastructure investment, and consumer choices.
Yeah.
So are you against all those things?
Obviously not. I just don't think it has anything to do with it. I guess his idea is that they will make more money, and therefore maybe they'll take that money and invest it into faster networks. Or they could just keep that money.
I think to be fair, I think what advocates, supporters of Ajit Pai and his ilk would say is, some of us ISP providers, whether it's Cox or Comcast, have put a lot of money into, wiring the country.
Right.
And why should some huge users like Netflix and Hulu be allowed to come in and take advantage? If they're going to be the ones making the money off it, we'll stop building the network.
The funny thing is they're making the money too. They're making a fortune. They invested money, admittedly, billions of dollars into setting up these internet connections. They now charge $60, maybe $80 a month for something that costs them about $5 a month to provide. They are making a mint. And so the idea that, oh my goodness, we're not going to, deploy anything so we're not making money, it's a red herring. They want to point at somebody. So Netflix is a bad guy. Someone else is a bad guy. They want to make more money. That's not a sin, but if you have a company with an uncontrolled monopoly that can make all the money they want, that's not good for the economy, and it's not good for the American public, and that's why they have to be controlled. Anyone will tell you, an uncontrolled monopolist will charge the most they can, and that's what they're trying to do.
What will it actually take? What would it actually take to undo net neutrality?
Well, they're going to try to, using the agency, just replace the rules with new rules. But where it gets complicated is that will then go to a court, which will say, did you move too quick? Was that too arbitrary, capricious? So there will be a court battle. This is going to last a little while. It's also always possible that Congress could get involved. So there's a battle coming up. If you love politics, if you love DC fights, this is like the healthcare debate for geeks, put it that way.
And where do you see the question of democracy coming into this? For one thing, you've been involved in this for so many years.
Yeah.
It used to be a lot of people would say, oh, this is so boring, people just eyes glaze over. It's really not true.
Yeah.
People have gotten really engaged with this issue. Look at all the millions of comments that came in last time around, and we'll hear how many comments have come in this in just a minute. As far as you are conscious, how strongly felt, how passionately engaged are the public on this issue?
I mean, there's no the public.
Yeah.
We live in an age where most people, think, oh, that's kind of an interesting, it sounds right. And then there's other people who are so passionate about this, feels so important to them. I'm one of them.
Yeah.
Because it's very fundamental. We live online, and so we need some basic rules of the road. And one of them is, I want this, you send it to me. Imagine the post office wasn't sending your mail. Or you plugged a device into the electric socket, it didn't work because of some fight they were having with the phone company. It's infuriating. So there's a part of individual freedom that is really strongly connected to net neutrality, and also a sense of opportunity that maybe with this universal network, anyone kind of gets their shot to communicate with anyone else. And I feel like no one really wants the phone and cable companies messing with that. It gets back to a very traditional American concern with the railroads, with the canals, with the streets, that they treat everybody fairly. And that's why I think it strikes a nerve.
Is that where we get into that whole Title I, Title II question?
Maybe. I mean, what the Obama administration did finally was to say, we got to treat this as a public utility. I mean, that's what Title II means in the jargon. It's a public utility. It's an essential. Everyone needs it. It needs to get to everybody fairly. And Congress, back in the 30s, set up rules for this. And that's what the phone and cable companies hate, because they don't want it recognized. They want to say, we're not public utilities, we're just these small little companies trying to do some stuff, but they are no longer in that position.
When we come back, we're going to talk more about the role that this agenda item plays in the Trump administration's larger agenda, as far as that can be ascertained. To just touch on that, what piece do you think this is to the bigger picture?
I actually don't know if the Trump White House is particular. They're dealing with Russian investigations, all this kind of stuff. I don't know if this has ever really reached the level of consciousness in the Trump administration that's a priority. I think there's this fellow, Ajit Pai, who was a former Verizon employee. He's got his chance to do something. There is a chance that, if people make enough trouble, the Trump administration will be like, or Congress will be like, what is this? why are we doing all this on behalf of cable and phone companies when nobody seems to support it?
All right, we'll be right back in a moment with more from Tim Wu about what is at stake in this ongoing battle to preserve net neutrality and a free and open internet. Stay tuned.
Tune in to one of the most important progressive voices in America, the Thom Hartmann Program, weekdays from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on Free Speech TV.
Well, to continue on that point, Tim, we were talking about strongly held American core values. One of those is freedom of the market, free marketplace, and that's something that IG Pai, the new FCC director, has been appealing to. Is the market functioning? I mean, he says it's functioning to make sure there is no abuse, so we don't need legislation.
Right. Markets only really function well when they're not monopolized, when there's competition. You know, everyone has always understood that when you have a completely monopolized market, you can't just rely on the market to do things for consumers, because a monopolist will charge the highest price it can and get away with it, or will bend the rules or do whatever it can. And, you know, in most of this country, internet access is monopolized or it's a duopoly, two companies. There's just very few choices. You know, what's funny is the Republicans used to understand this themselves. The Republicans actually at one point were big in favor of net neutrality. They were worried about the phone companies blocking new innovators, voice over IP, you know, like Skype. Yeah, that kind of thing. And they were the ones who started by punishing the phone companies when they were blocking internet applications. So the internet as we know it has grown up under government supervision because of the problem of monopoly. So to say the market is going to suddenly magically take care of things is actually just a carte blanche for unrestricted pricing. And is there evidence of abuse of those ISP providers, those internet service providers, manipulating download speeds and streaming speeds to get what they want? Well, let me tell you, in 2012, the cable companies, led by Comcast, kind of figured out a loophole in the net neutrality rules. They found a way that they could put pressure on Netflix and other video providers to either pony up or have their businesses go down the toilet, basically. And they said to Netflix, they said, hey, listen, unless you start throwing some money our direction, your customers are going to start seeing a lot of buffering and movies not delivering so well. And I call it the Tony Soprano model of internet business. Old school gangsterism. You go around, you threaten, and I think without net neutrality, you'd see a lot more of that. You'd see every company getting shaken down for their contribution to the cable empire, or else the possibility that, hey, maybe your blog won't load so well. And it's a potent threat. Who's going to be like, oh, I don't care? No, you know, they got it. So that's what I'm worried about. One aspect of the work that you've done since 2002, 2003, when that paper came out, is that you've actually started working in the Attorney General's office here in New York State. Is there anything that states can do in this discussion, or is it necessarily a kind of federal government move? The core of net neutrality is federal, and Congress established that back in the 30s. What the states can do, and frankly New York is doing, are to make sure that the speeds being delivered are actually what companies promise. There's a huge problem of companies promising people, 60 megs, 100 megs, 200 meg speeds, and the speeds being nothing like that. Not to mention some of the billing issues that they go on where you get crazy charges on your bills. So the states can be involved in consumer protection and holding the companies to their promises, but the federal government is at the core of net neutrality. That is what Congress established back in the 30s. And in the 30s, you're reminding me that we had big coalitions around these issues. The whole way that we got the airwaves as defined as a public resource was because educators, I think, and churches and labor all came together. What do you make of our coalition around these issues today? And is it as strong as that was then? I think it's really important to understand that media communications issues are inherently very public. There's something different between selling shoes and selling information. And there's been an effort over the last 20 years to say, oh, it's all the same, it doesn't matter, we should just treat them like any other business. That's why AG Pai is saying, I'll let the market take care of it.
Well, there's democratic values at stake that you don't have here unless you have more of a coalition involved. And that's why I think, while there has been some interest, I think we need to return to the way we thought about things in the 30s, in the 60s, where really a broad spectrum rose up and said, this is our media, these are our airwaves. We're the ones who handed over the license for you to print money on the cable franchise, and say, we need some stuff back. Yeah. And net neutrality is really just the beginning. Net neutrality is a baseline rule. Give the people their internet. But what about giving people lower prices? Yeah. What about giving opportunities for all kinds of groups, like in public service television, to get heard? I mean, these are things that we should be demanding.
I mean, we are sitting here in Manhattan Neighborhood Network's studio. Right. This whole facility only exists because there were grassroots organizers and activism when this technology was just coming in, and those cable companies wanted the franchise.
Yes, I think net neutrality is a baseline. It is a minimal kind of rule they should be sticking with. But I actually really believe the community should be asking more. I mean, do you know how much money the cable and phone companies are making from people's bills? People put hundreds of dollars a month, normal American families, into their cable bills, into their phone bills. Our bandwidth has become like electricity or like power. It's a source of enormous wealth. And we really should be asking for more in return.
So what would you like to see people do this time around? Some may feel like they did this 2 years ago, 7 years ago.
I think people can get tired of putting pressure, but it works. Eventually Congress and the Democratic parts of the government say, well, maybe we'll really care about this. Why are we on this side of the issue? I think even the Republican Party somehow has become the anti-net neutrality party. I don't know why. But I think because they think people don't care about it enough. But people, really at their hearts, care a lot about media issues, care about communications, care about a free and open internet. And if it becomes an issue where there's no one on the other side, I think ultimately even conservative groups will be like, why are we on the wrong side of this issue?
Did the Trump election of 2016 change anything, you think?
Well, of course it changed everything, because Trump ran on a populist position, but then he installed people who are all anti-populist. He's like, we're going to stand up to the big companies. Then he installed people who bow to the big companies. So, his election has been a big bait and switch. I mean, he ran as a populist. He ran on some positions where Bernie Sanders was. And then he's delivered has been absolutely just the far right wing of the Republican Party. So that's what I'd say about that.
Will you ever run again? You did run for Lieutenant Governor 2014 with Zephyr Teachout, a Bernie Sanders type candidate. What did you find on the doorsteps as you campaigned then? And for people out there who might be thinking about running on this issue now, is it a winner?
So running was fun, and I found what people really cared about was economics and economic justice. They cared about their bills being too high. They cared about rent being too high. Half the time I felt like I was running against Time Warner Cable. They wanted a fairer deal. These issues really matter to people. And I think politicians, Trump did it by essentially lying about it, say, look, I'm going to make your life better. They want politicians to come there and say, listen, I want a square deal for the ordinary middle-class American. I'm going to make your life better, and then deliver on those promises.
So did I hear that you might run again?
No current plans, as the saying goes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tim. In a moment, we will broaden our discussion and hear more from other experts about what is at stake with net neutrality, as well as what it means for you. And we'll find out how you can join the fight to preserve a free and open internet for everybody.
You already know that you can't trust corporate media with reporting the real news. And as alternative media rises to rail against fake news and the forces behind it, the people-powered movements, the artists, activists, creative, and visionaries often get lost in the shuffle. But not here. Act Out is a platform for the stories of creative and grassroots activism, from street artists to gardeners, from community organizers to filmmakers. It's the low-life scum and the facts and the battles waged for truth, freedom, and justice, and how you can contribute in small and large ways, from tweets to marching in the streets. I'm Eleanor Goldfield. This is your tipping point. This is Act Out.
Welcome back. I'm joined now by three other prominent advocates for net neutrality. Gigi Sohn is former advisor to the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. Brandy Collins, campaign director for Color of Change, the nation's largest online racial justice organization. And Craig Aaron, president and CEO of Free Press, a media advocacy group that is a leader in the fight to support net neutrality. I want to start with you, Gigi. You were there in the room working with the FCC when all this happened last time. Based on what you went through then during the public comment period, what do you think Ajit Pai's FCC is going through now?
Well, they're going through even more than what we went through. So when Tom Wheeler adopted the strongest ever net neutrality rules, almost 4 million Americans weighed in.
Amazing.
Now we just passed the first initial comment period deadline. There's another one in August. There have been 8.3 million comments filed.
Fascinating.
So double. And the pressure is enormous because unlike even 2.5 years ago, you don't have to explain net neutrality to people anymore. They understand it means their ability to control their internet experience, and they don't want to give that up to Comcast or AT&T.
Now, they will say about that period that you were there that you got comments from both sides of the debate, that it was a bipartisan thing. How were the sides? Who were the sides that expressed themselves in the comments?
Well, we did an analysis of the comments, and 3-1, they were in favor of the strongest possible net neutrality rules grounded in the strongest legal authority. So it was pretty overwhelming, one side against another. It's not about partisanship.
Right, exactly.
So there have been 3 polls done in recent months showing overwhelmingly bipartisan support for net neutrality, for strong rules. So it's not about that. It's about whether you are allied with the internet service providers like AT&T, Comcast, Verizon, and Charter, or you're allied with internet freedom, the ability to control your internet experience. That's where the division takes place.
So they will say that it's bipartisan, but it wasn't even Steven. Not even close.
Oh, it wasn't even close. There were far more in favor of net neutrality than against it. It didn't matter what side you were on. If you were in favor of the strongest possible net neutrality rules, that was 3-1 in favor of the strongest possible net neutrality rules.
And were you involved in all this at that time, Brandy? Was Color of Change?
Yes, Color of Change has been involved in the net neutrality fight for I think about 10 years, ever since the genesis of Color of Change in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Color of Change is an organization that is built on the principle of internet freedom, the ability to speak truth to power, to organize for equity, and the ability to reach and build community across time and geography via the internet. So it's been extremely important to our fight, and we've been heavily involved. The first time around, we submitted about 100,000 comments. This time around, we continue to submit comments as well as personal stories that we've collected across the country.
So let me ask you to sort of develop that a little bit. I mean, we describe Color of Change as the nation's largest online racial justice organization. Is this a racial justice issue, people might ask?
Net neutrality is absolutely a racial justice issue. When I think about some of the things that we've seen around organizing, around Black Lives Matters and other issues over the last couple of years, it's absolutely been powered by the internet. It's been powered by this ability to challenge predominant media narratives. One stat that we often talk about is that when Ferguson Summer was happening and people were organizing on the ground, it wasn't being covered by CNN or any of the major news outlets. It took 1 million tweets and video from on the ground before it actually started getting covered as a news story. That ability for us to organize and challenge those media narratives has been crucial to racial justice in the 21st century.
And is this where you came into this fight as a telecom law advocate and
No, actually, I came in, well, I started at Center for Media Justice, which is another organization that's been at the forefront of this fight around net neutrality and media justice. And when I came in, I was this sort of plucky lawyer masquerading as a communications person that had no idea, like, what is this?
That's how Gigi came in,
yeah. I just want to be able to, like, look at YouTube or whatever in peace. What does this have to do with anything? And it became obvious in my time there, particularly during Ferguson Summer, how important it was, not just for our ability to organize and breathe life into the First Amendment, so to speak, but also just for business entrepreneurship. In fact, one stat is that Black women have developed businesses at 322% of the rate since 1997, and is at the forefront of business development. And a lot of that is powered by the internet, by the ability to have online businesses when they can't get loans to have storefronts. So this isn't just a First Amendment issue, it's also about entrepreneurship, dignity, quality of life.
Craig, the Ajit Pai FCC will say, but they're for the consumer, they're for entrepreneurship. In fact, it's entrepreneurship and investment that's at stake if the net neutrality rules as we have them now are allowed to stand.
Yeah, well, one thing you'll learn about the Ajit Pai FCC is that they're lying. They lie a lot, and they've really misrepresented the case. As someone who's been working on net neutrality for more than a decade, when we first started talking about this term, the lines were a little clearer. You were for it or against it. But net neutrality has gotten so popular, like Gigi was pointing out, so overwhelmingly popular, that now even our opponents say, no, I'm for net neutrality. I'm just not for doing it in this certain way. But the reality is there's one way to do it. The FCC has to have the authority to actually enforce the rules when there's a problem. You might hear something called Title II. That's what that means. It's just what establishes the FCC's authority. So if you're for that, you're for real net neutrality. If you're against that, you're just pretending. And that's been the problem. And that's been the problem with this FCC. They've really misrepresented the stakes here, and especially when it comes to entrepreneurship and business. And that's why, literally at this point, thousands of startups have written to the FCC saying, no, I'm not a big guy yet. I'm not Google. I'm not Facebook. I need the open internet if I'm going to have a chance.
Gigi, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I've been doing a little bit of analysis of some of the comments that have been coming in, and you see people like caterers and baby monitor developers, and not people you wouldn't expect, right? The press, the mainstream press likes to portray this as AT&T versus Google. Right. Well, of course, that ignores 8 million individual comments, but it also ignores the small businesses that care deeply about this, and frankly, mainstream businesses like the National Association of Realtors. Okay, not exactly a bunch of lefty liberals, right? So folks understand that if you don't have the ability to get online without having to go through a gatekeeper and say, Mother, may I, to Comcast and AT&T, you're going to be behind the 8 ball, okay? And you're going to be disadvantaged. So here's another example of an industry that cares deeply about these issues, the alarm industry. Well, why should they care? Well, they care because Comcast has an alarm business, and AT&T has an alarm business, and Verizon has an alarm business. They all have home security businesses. And they're not going to be able to compete if Comcast says, you know what, ADT, if you want a quality of service that's equal to my alarm business, you have to pay me a fee. So you're seeing a lot of businesses that you wouldn't necessarily expect to care. They care an awful lot.
Now, you mentioned the sort of framing of AT&T versus Google, but I read not so long ago, middle of July, that well, AT&T was a sponsor or a supporter of your Day of Action for Internet Freedom. Greg, not true?
Not true, to say the least. AT&T did show up all of a sudden, a very recent convert to the cause, and it was really just misinformation. They set up a page to coincide with this massive Day of Action for Net Neutrality, trying to trick, I don't know who they actually tricked, but trying to trick people into submitting comments that actually supported their position of undermining the rules. And I think, again, this shows you if AT&T has to pretend it's for net neutrality, literally at the same time they're suing to overturn the FCC's old rules. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to lobby Congress to overturn the rules, and yet they're still pretending for net neutrality. That tells you just how popular net neutrality is.
And if I could just tag on to that, you hear a lot of, well, there's so much uncertainty, right? We need certainty. My response is we have certainty. We have rules that have been upheld by a Circuit Court of Appeals in D.C. twice now. Okay, they're the strongest rules. We have certainty. So you're the ones creating uncertainty by going to the Ajit Pai FCC and going to Congress and saying, no, we don't want the rules that are on the books now.
We have had certainty when it comes to our coverage of news events. And I want to come back to what you said, Brandy, that was so powerful about Ferguson. Because as you're talking, I'm thinking of that moment when those rebellions were happening in Ferguson, and there was a kind of lockdown of coverage. Airspace was locked down. So in a way, are we kind of talking about internet space possibly being locked down in that same way? I mean, cameras could literally not photograph what was happening from the sky.
Yeah, no, that was interesting how they had they were preventing certain journalists from being able to enter in this space. Obviously, that doesn't account for the citizen journalists on the ground that were documenting all of these issues. But absolutely, what we're talking about with overturning these rules are essentially creating borders around our internet, the ability to sort of block content. To me, personally, it's a little chilling when I hear President Trump say things, as he said in the past, in one breath that he thinks that the First Amendment is for foolish people, and then on the other breath has been anti-net neutrality. Because what that says to me is that he doesn't value that ability to speak truth to power, to organize, that we could very well be marching toward an internet that resembles Russia, where certain content is blocked and not made available to folks on the ground.
And yeah, Craig, he is a man who understands absolutely the power of the internet. Look at his support among the Breitbart News fans.
Well, yeah, and it's so interesting. You actually, and I actually don't recommend you go and read Breitbart's coverage of net neutrality, but if you do, and you get in the comments, you'll find like an unbelievable response saying, no, wait, this is the one thing Obama got right. Even in that space where literally they're being fed all these lies about what the last administration did, what this administration is doing, even there people understand, wait a minute, we don't want a handful of big media companies in charge of our internet experience. And they know that Comcast owns NBC. They know that AT&T is trying to buy Time Warner, already owns DirecTV. Verizon now owns AOL. They see these gatekeepers forming, this gatekeeper power. And so I think there is this growing understanding of, no, we just want the free and open internet we have, because we know that's the one that gives everybody an opportunity. If you have a good idea, if you have something important to say, if you want to organize in your community, it's that fundamental protection, that net neutrality, open internet protection, that actually makes it possible. So I think, I don't think Donald Trump even knows what net neutrality is. On his few statements about it, he's like kind of said some confusing things about the fairness doctrine. But there's no question that the powerful lobbies in Washington are trying to take really advantage of the chaos of the Trump administration and one-party power in Washington to just push forward whatever they can. And that's why they've been huge donors. AT&T was, I think, the biggest donor, or one of the biggest donors to the inauguration. They're trying to move, before the wheels fall off and whatever Trump is doing, they're trying to gut as many rules as possible, because they know, and Gigi knows this from being on the inside, it's so much easier to tear things down than build them back up. And just at the end of the Obama administration, finally, the Federal Communications Commission, it's supposed to be the people's watchdog, it finally lost its baby teeth, right? It's just barely able to bark, and here come the lobbyists again trying to defang it.
Well, it makes you wonder whether the FCC isn't maybe the target of all this as much as anything else. Am I wrong in being suspicious that this is really about taking down a federal watchdog, if you will?
Oh, that's exactly what this is all about. Okay, there's a lot of focus on the net neutrality rules, which obviously are incredibly important to preserve, an open democratic communication system. But what this is really about for the folks that are looking at repeal and pushing repeal is turning the FCC into nothing more than a spectrum management agency. So this legal grounding that we keep talking about, this Title II, allows the FCC to protect consumers from fraudulent billing, protect consumers from, prices that just skyrocket, protect from things like privacy violations, right. So that's what Title II does. It also is the legal grounding under which the Lifeline subsidy, which gives a small amount of money monthly to poor people to get broadband. It's now a broadband program. It undergirds that as well. So there are a lot of things that Title II allows the FCC to do. So if you take away that legal authority, the FCC all of a sudden has no oversight whatsoever over broadband internet access. And my thought is, how can that be? The FCC was set up in 1934 to oversee communications networks. How can it be that in 2017 they would have no authority, no ability to oversee the most important network of our lifetime? It makes no sense to me, but that's the ultimate goal. You put your finger on it.
Do you want to add anything to that, Brandy?
Yeah, I think about, as Gigi was talking about, the history of the FCC and what it's meant. And I think about the role of communications throughout several generations. Every time we're presented with a new platform, the opportunity and the promise behind it, for folks, everyday people, to be able to create innovate, challenge, all of these things.
Because in the 30s, when these laws were put in place, it was around radio, then around television in the 40s and 50s,
exactly.
cable in the 60s and 70s.
Every time there's been efforts to deregulate that and to take it from the hands of the people back into the hands of the 1%. And that's what we're seeing with the internet right now.
Anything you want to add on that part of it, Craig? Because I want to talk more when we come back actually about Lifeline in case people don't understand how that's related to this. I think it's an important piece. But just before we go to break.
Yeah, well, I think Brandy raises such good points about just the gatekeeper power. And this is the fight that's happening among big media companies right now. They're all trying to position themselves to get in front of that connection that goes into your house. They want to be the one who get to pick and choose which sites are going to work, which services, who can they favor, and who has to come to them to ask for permission if they want to innovate. With net neutrality, that doesn't exist. You have a good idea, try it out, find an audience. Without it, suddenly you have to go and take your idea to AT&T, Verizon, or Comcast, probably offer them a piece of it, negotiate with them, and then all of a sudden, it's not what's the best service, what's the best idea, it's what fits in with their business plan. And suddenly you take this amazing free and open internet that we all treasure, and it starts to look a lot like cable television, where somebody's picking and choosing the channels for you and putting them on the tiers that they decide, and really taking that control away from the user, which is what has made the internet so unique.
Why do I keep thinking if you like what corporate-controlled politicians did to voting rights, you're going to love what they do to free speech? We're going to take more when we come back. We'll be back with the rest of our discussion in just a bit. You are watching What's at Stake, Net Neutrality, a joint production of Free Speech TV and Manhattan Neighborhood Network.
I want to say I appreciate every show that you have so far. Seems like these days that if you want to have the real news brought to you, you have to watch this station. I love Free Speech TV. Thanks.
Welcome back. We're talking about net neutrality and what is at stake right now. Now that you know the issues, we're going to ask what can you and we do, what should we do to preserve a free and open internet? Craig Arendt, besides going online and engaging in what is kind of disparagingly called clicktivism, I think in our pre-roll and video, what can people do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to defend clicktivism a little bit, which is, you know, behind all those clicks, there are real people who took their time to weigh in on a proceeding at the Federal Communications Commission. I mean, it's unheard of. 8 million people actually trying to get involved in the government and make their voices heard. But there is more you can do, and what we have to remember is it is much easier said than done for the FCC to do away with these rules. And the overwhelming public opposition, the utter failure of them to make a strong legal case for undoing these rules, all mean this is going to be a long fight. It's a fight that's going to go to the courts. It's a fight that is also going to go to Congress. And so it's really important that people are contacting and speaking to their legislators, letting them know that this is something they actually care about. And it's really important that they're actually talking about this in their local communities, talking to their friends and neighbors, making sure this is on the agenda. And, you know, if they want, I definitely urge them to go to battleforthenet.com, freepress.net, sign up, and we're building a volunteer corps of people all across the country who care about the free and open internet and finding ways where they can really get involved, deepen their engagement, organize their own actions, and connect with other people all across the country who really care about the free and open internet and don't want to take this lying down. I think that's the story here, and for the story for 10 years is they're constantly counting out the public in this conversation. They always say, oh, the big companies are going to win, of course they're going to win. And yet pretty much every time we're able to hold them off and then actually win, actually reverse what's happening. That's the great story of net neutrality thus far, and it can continue to be that story if enough people speak out and get involved.
Brandy, you were part of a rally, I think, in February, marking the second anniversary of the Obama-era rules, and somebody there made the point that this was the second anniversary of the free open internet rules, but it was the 5th anniversary of the killing of Trayvon Martin. And you've made that connection, but you've scored a lot of victories at Color of Change in those 5 years. You want to count this amongst those, I'm imagining. How can people join with you?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to count this amongst their victories. Go to colorofchange.org to learn more about how to get involved. We also have internetirl.org, which is something that we set up because we realized that this issue wasn't fully accessible to a lot of communities, that folks weren't necessarily connecting the dots between Trayvon Martin and net neutrality. So we're asking people to check out that site as well. And as Craig said, continue to hit up Congress. If you're part of a library association or whatever's happening in your community, make sure that the businesses and the schools and the people in your community are also engaged in fighting on this issue.
Do you want to add something to that?
Well, I don't think you can emphasize enough the importance of talking to your members of Congress, your senators and your representatives, because they are ultimately accountable to the people. So several months ago, Congress, in my opinion, wrongly and foolishly repealed online privacy rules that we adopted when I was at the FCC. And they did it using a process that was very quick. And we came awfully close to winning in the House, but the leaders there sped it up so that they would lose. And they've been getting hit upside the head in town halls because these are rules that never even went into effect, but people were so upset that somebody would take these rules away.
Remind us what was at stake.
So this was about your and my ability to tell our internet service provider, the same companies, Comcast, AT&T, et cetera, whether or not they could use our personal information, sell it to third parties, and the like.
What
and what
we're
the rules
watching,
did,
what we're shopping for,
what the rules did
through.
was gave us the choice as opposed to giving them the choice. Very similar to what's going on here. And a lot of members of Congress have buyer's remorse, and that was not bipartisan. That was almost entirely Republicans voting for repeal with a handful of exceptions, and Democrats voting against it. So they're still feeling the pain from that. Yeah. So if they're hearing about yet another internet-related issue that people feel passionately about, they're going to say, oh my God, why are we doing this? And maybe they tell Chairman Pai, why are we doing this? Yeah. Do we really need another issue on top of health care and privacy to go to the polls in 2018 that consumers are going to be angry at us about?
Well, you mentioned healthcare, and that takes me back to that question of Lifeline, which I do want you to explain to our viewers. Lifeline is a service that is literally a lifeline for lots of low-income people in particularly rural areas who don't have access, in some cases, to medical services without their access to the internet.
Correct.
That's at stake here, isn't it?
It's huge. So Lifeline is a subsidy, a monthly subsidy of $9.25.
Say that again, just in case people didn't catch it.
So Lifeline is a subsidy that individuals get of $9.25.
$9.25.
It's not a lot of money, but in the telephone context, it led to free services. Now, in 2016, the FCC modernized Lifeline so that it would go to broadband. And in 5 years, it will be broadband only. Okay? And the hope was we would bring in more competition in the Lifeline space and drive down the price. Now, Comcast, who we've been beating up on, to its credit, has a $9.95 broadband service called Internet Essentials. And we were hoping to kind of bring them and other cable companies in the Lifeline tent, and that would drive down the prices and raise up service. Well, one of the first things that Chairman Pai does when he gets to the FCC is says, no, we're not going to encourage more Lifeline providers. In fact, we're going to just keep it the way it is and let the incumbents continue to rip people off. So how does it tie to net neutrality? It ties to net neutrality, as I said before, without that legal grounding, without Title II, it is a very uncertain whether Lifeline can be used for broadband. And I can guarantee you that the forces that don't like subsidies to poor people will go to court if Title II is repealed and say, no, there's no legal grounding for Lifeline either.
And this takes us back to Katrina and Hurricane Sandy and what has happened after every disaster, whether it's man-made or natural, in which telephone providers have actually used that as an excuse to stop providing anything other than internet, wireless service. That becomes a real issue when that's your way to reach your doctor or your way to reach the hospital.
Absolutely. We've actually been doing town halls around the country with Free Press and Voices for Internet Freedom Coalition. And we've been hearing from folks, one of the things you said was that Lifeline is important in rural communities, and that's absolutely true. It's also important in urban communities. We were in Skid Row, where there were people who would tell us stories around how having a phone and having an email address, this is the only address that I have. Like, I'm proud of this address. This is the way that I keep in touch with my family. This is the way that I go to job interviews. Like this stuff is so important. And I think the other interesting piece to this is that Lifeline was actually, if I'm not mistaken, started under President Reagan, strengthened under George W. Bush. So again, this isn't about, it's become political football, but this isn't about politics. This is about something else. This is about the bottom dollar for ISPs.
Craig, I got to just end. Thank you for that, both of you. I think it really adds an extra layer to what we're talking about here. The one thing we haven't mentioned are some of the corporations that have lined up. We talked about AT&T, but Google, Facebook, Netflix. The only thing about all this that constantly leaves me feeling a little queasy is I'm a small media producer. Am I really on the same side as these people? Are they really on the same side as me?
Well, for now, yes. When we're talking about, look, these are companies, these giant companies, and we have to watch these companies and the power that they have too. But these are companies that were created because of the free and open internet. Google used to be in a garage somewhere. Facebook was in a dorm room. If there's going to be someone to compete with them in the future, we're going to have net neutrality. And the danger is that eventually those companies could get so big that they don't care anymore, and they'll cut a deal, or they'll think, oh, regulations hinder us too much, let's make a deal. But none of us who aren't a big, giant conglomerate can afford to make those choices. We'll never have the chance to have the reach of a Google or a Facebook or a New York Times or a Fox News, but that's what the open internet offers. It's just that important, and to so many aspects of our lives. You know, net neutrality is just the start. You know, we're really talking about how do we make this essential communications infrastructure, the free and open internet, affordable and accessible for everybody. But if you don't have these baseline protections, we will literally never get there. It's only when the FCC has a stick, when they have a whistle, when they can hold these guys accountable, that they can actually push them to offer more affordable service, compete. And that's what we've seen in the 2 years since these rules were put into place. Tons of exciting innovation is happening. All these companies are starting to offer their over-the-top services where they say, oh, you don't need a cable subscription anymore. You can just get these things. All kinds of new businesses are getting started because of the free and open internet. And so when you combine that, oh my gosh, the business value, the democratic value, the organizing value, that's why so many people are throwing up their hands and saying, what are we doing this for? Why are we giving away these fundamental protections just to do a little bit of a favor for AT&T, Comcast, and Verizon, who I'm already paying $100, $150 a month?
Some of the least
it's unthinkable.
Popular businesses in the world, I think, has been established.
And for good reason. Yeah, exactly. And that's why everyone agrees. The one thing we can all agree on, that we hate our cable company, but it's because they're so big, they don't actually have to serve the individual. Right. They don't care about that. It's all about this big picture, this bottom line, and the millions they're spending to influence our government, it's nothing for them, because they stand to get billions in return. That's why a place like the FCC is so important, because they actually are big enough. Individually, I can't choose to just go away, pick a new provider. I don't have another choice. I need someone who can step in, and that's what net neutrality is about, and that's why these questions of can the FCC actually step in are so important.
Well, we have about a minute and a half left. Last thoughts, Gigi, on what could happen here on in. There's a few more days and weeks for public comments. Then what happens? And if the worst happens, what happens?
So August 16th is the last day for public comment. So after that, the FCC will supposedly go back and come up with their decision, repealing the rules or replacing the strong rules with weaker rules. Or they may decide not to do anything. If there's enough public pressure, particularly if there's pressure on Congress, Republicans may say, look, it's not worth it, okay? At that point, maybe Congress starts to consider legislation, and that's going to be a sticky wicket, without a doubt. But it's a lot easier to stop bad legislation than it is to stop an administrative agency that has the votes to repeal the rules. If PI does go through, then we go to the courts.
Appreciate it. Brandy, Craig, Gigi, fantastic to have you. We're about out of time. Please join me in thanking our guests on this special program, What's at Stake? Net Neutrality. It has been a joint production of two independent media outlets, Free Speech TV and the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. My big thanks to Tim Wu, who was here earlier. Thank you, Gigi Sohn, former advisor to the Federal Communications Commission, Brandy Collins, Color of Change, the nation's largest online racial justice organization, and Craig Aaron of Free Press, one of the leading public interest groups active in the battle to preserve net neutrality. From the Manhattan Neighborhood Network studios at El Barrio Firehouse in East Harlem, New York, you have been watching What's at Stake? Net neutrality. I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks.